Elena Voss opened her eyes to an empty bed, and something inside her chest was screaming before her mind even understood why. The room was dark, except for the last dying light of the candles they had lit only hours ago. Her wedding dress still hung on the chair where she had carefully placed it, and the flowers from her hair were scattered across the pillow beside her. But the pillow was cold. Damon's side of the bed had not been touched. She sat up slowly, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. As a wolf, and as a newly bonded mate, Elena could usually feel Damon the way she felt her own heartbeat. It was a warm thread that connected them, something that had settled into her chest the moment they said their vows in front of the entire Ashwood pack. That thread should have been humming with closeness. Instead, it felt stretched thin, pulled tight in a direction that made her stomach turn. She told herself it was nothing. Alphas had duties. Perhaps a fight had broken out near the northern fence, or a rogue wolf had crossed onto packland, and Damon had gone to handle it without waking her. It was their wedding night, yes, but he was still the alpha of hundreds of wolves who depended on him. She reached for her robe, wrapped it around herself, and stepped out into the hallway of the alpha's private wing, listening for any sound. The pack house at night was usually silent, the kind of silence that came from discipline and respect. Nobody wandered these halls without reason. But tonight, Elena heard something faint coming from the west side of the house, past the study, past the old library that Damon's grandfather had built. She followed the sound the way her instincts told her to, the thread in her chest pulling harder with every step, like it wanted her to stop, like it already knew what she would find. She reached the west wing and paused. This was where the unmarried pack members stayed, the smaller rooms kept for visiting family and pack elders who did not want the noise of the main house. Her sister, Bree, had been given a room here for the wedding weekend, since their parents lived 2 territories away and could not make the full journey. Elena told herself, again, that it was nothing. Maybe Bree had a nightmare. Maybe there had been an emergency with the flowers or the caterers left something broken and someone needed the alpha's approval before morning. She was reaching for excuses now, and some small, honest part of her recognized that. She kept walking anyway. The hallway light flickered once, and for a moment, Elena almost turned back. It would have been easier to turn back. She could have returned to her bed, waited for Damon to come find her, and let the morning explain everything in a way that made sense. But her wolf would not let her. Her wolf, sharp and alert and deeply unsettled, pushed her forward until she stood outside her sister's door. There was a light on inside. She could see it glowing faintly beneath the door frame. And there were voices, low enough that she had to hold her breath to hear them clearly. One of them was Bree's voice, soft and familiar, the same voice that used to whisper secrets to Elena when they were children sharing a room. The other voice belonged to Damon. Elena stood frozen in the hallway, her hand hovering near the door but not touching it. She told herself there could be an explanation. She told herself that hearing 2 voices in a room did not mean what her racing heart insisted it meant, but the thread in her chest, the one that was supposed to only exist between mates, was aching in a way she had never felt before, as if it were being pulled somewhere it should not go. She thought about the wedding only hours earlier. She remembered walking down the aisle in the meadow behind the pack house, flowers woven into her braid, the whole pack howling in celebration as Damon took her hand. She remembered the way he had looked at her, the way his eyes had softened, the way everyone had said they made a perfect match. She remembered her sister standing near the front row, dressed in pale blue, smiling the way a sister should smile on a day like that. Elena had not noticed anything wrong at the time. Why would she have? She had been too happy, too caught up in the joy of finally becoming Luna of the Ashwood pack, a dream she had held on to since she was a young girl, watching her own mother lead beside her father. She had not noticed the way Bree's smile did not quite reach her eyes whenever Damon looked at Elena instead of her. She had not noticed the long looks, the small touches during the reception that lasted a second too long. She had been too busy being happy to notice any of it. Now, standing outside a door in the middle of the night, all of those small moments came rushing back to her at once, arranging themselves into a pattern she did not want to see. She lifted her hand, and this time, she let it fall against the door. The voices inside stopped immediately. There was a pause, the kind of pause that told Elena everything before anyone said a word. Then she heard movement, quick and clumsy. Someone standing too fast, fabric shifting. She pushed the door open. The room was small, lit only by a single lamp on the nightstand. Bree was sitting up in the bed, her hair loose around her shoulders, clutching the blanket against herself. Damon stood near the window, his shirt only half buttoned, his face pale in the low light. For a long moment nobody spoke. Elena stood in the doorway, feeling the thread in her chest twist into something cold and sharp, and she understood, without needing anyone to explain it, that her wedding night had just become the worst night of her life. Damon was the first to move. He stepped forward, his hands raised as if he could somehow stop what was happening, simply by reaching toward her. "Elena," he said, his voice low, careful, the voice he used when he was trying to calm a frightened pack member. "This is not what you think." Elena did not answer right away. She looked between them, between the man she had promised herself to only hours earlier, and the sister she had shared a childhood with, and she felt something inside her go very still and very quiet, the way the world sometimes goes quiet right before a storm. "Then tell me what it is," she said finally, her voice steadier than she expected it to be, "because from where I am standing, it looks very simple." Bree pulled the blanket tighter around herself, and for the first time, Elena saw something flicker across her sister's face. It was not shame, it was not even fear. It looked, if anything, like calculation, like Bree was already working out what to say next, already building the story she would tell. "Elena, please," Bree said softly. "Let us explain." Elena's eyes moved to Damon. She was his mate. She had felt the bond settle into place during their ceremony, the way every wolf described it, a warmth that told her she belonged to him and he belonged to her. She had believed, foolishly perhaps, that a bond like that could not be broken by circumstance, that it was something sacred and unshakable. Now she was standing in a doorway, watching that same bond twist painfully in her chest, and she understood that whatever she had believed about mate bonds, about love, about promises made in front of an entire pack, none of it had protected her from this moment. "I am listening," Elena said, crossing her arms over her chest, partly to steady herself, and partly to keep from shaking. Damon exchanged a glance with Bree, and that single glance, so brief and so intimate, told Elena more than any words could have. There was history there. There was familiarity. Whatever this was, it had not started tonight. "It happened without warning," Damon said carefully. "During the reception, when Bree came close to congratulate us, I felt something shift. The bond, Elena, it is supposed to settle on one person, but sometimes, in rare cases, when the scent of a close relative is too similar, the wolf can become confused." Elena stared at him, waiting for the rest of the explanation, waiting for something that would make sense of what she was seeing. But that seemed to be it. That was his answer. His wolf had become confused, and confusion had led him to his new wife's sister's bedroom on their wedding night. "You are telling me," Elena said slowly, "that your wolf mistook my sister for me." "It is more complicated than that," Damon said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "The pull was strong. I could not explain it, and I did not know how to stop it. I am sorry, Elena. I never wanted to hurt you." Bree finally spoke again, her voice gentle, in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. "We did not plan this," she said. "You have to believe that. I never wanted to hurt you either. But some things are simply stronger than we are." Elena looked at her sister for a long moment. She thought about every birthday they had celebrated together, every late-night conversation, every promise they had made to always be honest with each other. She thought about how she had asked Bree, months earlier, whether she liked Damon, and Bree had laughed and said of course not. "He is basically going to be my brother." "Some things are stronger than we are," Elena repeated quietly. "Is that really what you are going to say to me right now?" Neither of them answered. The silence stretched on, heavy and unbearable, until Elena finally shook her head and stepped back from the doorway. "I am going to bed," she said, though her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "We will talk about this in the morning, in front of the elders, because I refuse to stand here and be told that fate is responsible for what I just witnessed." She turned and walked away before either of them could respond, her steps quick and deliberate down the hallway, past the study, past the library, back toward the room that was supposed to be her new home. She did not cry, not yet. She was too stunned, too numb, her mind replaying the scene over and over, as if repetition might somehow change the outcome. When she reached her room, she closed the door behind her and pressed her back against it, sliding down until she was sitting on the floor, staring at the wedding dress still hanging on the chair. The flowers on the pillow had wilted slightly, their petals curling at the edges, and Elena thought that was fitting somehow. Everything about this day had wilted faster than it should have. She placed a hand against her chest, feeling for the thread that connected her to Damon. It was still there, still pulling in the wrong direction, aching, with a dull, constant pain that she suspected would not fade anytime soon. She had heard stories about mate bonds shifting or fading over time when a marriage failed, but she had never heard of anything like this happening on the very first night. Sleep did not come easily. Elena lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the wedding, searching for signs she might have missed. She thought about the way Bree had hugged her a little too long after the ceremony. She thought about the way Damon had seemed distracted during the toasts, his eyes drifting toward the crowd more than once. She thought about small comments from pack members over the past few months, comments she had dismissed as harmless teasing, about how close Bree and Damon had grown while helping plan the wedding. By the time the first light of morning crept through the curtains, Elena had made a decision. She would not simply accept an explanation about confused wolves and uncontrollable instincts. She would find out exactly what had happened between her husband and her sister, and she would do it without breaking down in front of either of them again. She rose from the floor, her body stiff and aching from the long night, and walked to the window. Outside, the pack grounds were beginning to stir with early morning activity, wolves moving between buildings, preparing for another ordinary day, unaware that their new Luna's world had shattered only hours after it was supposed to begin. Elena watched them for a long moment, then turned away from the window, her expression hardening into something new, something that had not existed in her the day before. She had walked into this marriage, believing in loyalty, in bonds, in the idea that love meant choosing someone completely. She was beginning to understand that not everyone shared that belief, and she intended to find out exactly how deep this betrayal went before she decided what to do next. Whatever happened next, she promised herself one thing: she would not be the last person in this pack to understand the truth. She had been humiliated once already. She refused to let it happen a second time without a fight. The morning sun rose fully over Ashwood territory, casting long golden light across the meadow, where, only the day before, Elena had promised herself to a man she thought she knew. Now she stood at her window, watching that same light touch the pack grounds, and she understood that her life, and her marriage, would never be simple again. She dressed quietly, choosing plain clothes instead of anything that might draw attention, and made her way toward the elders' hall, determined to demand answers before the rest of the pack woke to gossip and whispers. Whatever explanation Damon and Bree had prepared overnight, Elena intended to see through it, no matter how carefully constructed it might be. As she walked, the thread in her chest continued its dull, constant ache, a quiet reminder that something precious had been broken on the very night it was supposed to be sealed forever. Elena pressed a hand against her chest, took a steady breath, and kept walking, refusing to let the pain slow her down. She had questions, and she intended to get answers, no matter what it cost her. The elders' hall was still quiet when Elena arrived, the long wooden table empty, except for a single figure seated near the far end. Grace Whitmore, the oldest of the pack elders, looked up as Elena entered, her sharp eyes studying the young Luna's face with the kind of attention that missed nothing. "You did not sleep," Grace said, not as a question. "No," Elena admitted, taking a seat across from her. "I did not." Grace folded her hands on the table, waiting. She had led the pack council for over 30 years, had seen alphas rise and fall, had watched marriages formed and broken more times than she could count. Elena had always respected her for that steadiness, for the way she never seemed rattled by anything. "Something happened last night," Elena said, choosing her words carefully. "I need to know if you have ever heard of a mate bond shifting from one person to another, specifically, to a close relative." Grace's expression did not change, but something in her eyes sharpened. "Tell me what happened, Elena, all of it." "Why?" So Elena told her. She described waking to an empty bed, following the pull of a broken thread, finding Damon and Bree together in that small room off the West Wing. She described the explanation Damon had given her, about confusion, and scent, and forces stronger than himself. As she spoke, she watched Grace's face for any sign of surprise, any indication that this was truly as rare and mysterious as Damon claimed. There was no surprise. There was only a slow, careful stillness that told Elena the older woman was thinking through something with great caution. "I have led this council for 3 decades, Grace said finally. I have heard many strange stories about bonds and instincts, but I have never once heard of a bond shifting on its own, especially not within hours of a formal binding ceremony. Bonds are not that easily confused, Elena. They are built through years of familiarity and the specific chemistry between 2 wolves. A scent similarity between siblings might cause brief confusion in passing, perhaps a moment of hesitation, but not what you are describing." Elena felt something settle in her stomach, a confirmation of what she had already suspected, but had not wanted to say aloud. "So he lied to me." "I did not say that," Grace replied carefully. "I said what you described does not match what I understand about bonds. There could be explanations we have not considered, but you deserve a full council hearing, not whispered excuses in a hallway." "Will they believe me?" Elena asked, and she hated how uncertain her voice sounded. He is the alpha. Bree is his choice now, apparently. What happens to a Luna who accuses her alpha of betrayal on the very night of their binding? Grace was quiet for a long moment before answering. "You are the Luna, Elena, chosen and bound in front of this entire pack. That title carries weight, even now. But I will not lie to you. Some on this council will be reluctant to challenge Damon, especially so soon after a ceremony meant to strengthen the pack. You will need more than your word. You will need evidence, patterns, something that shows this was not confusion but choice." Elena nodded slowly, understanding the weight of what Grace was telling her. She could not simply demand justice and expect it to be given freely. She would need to build her case carefully, the same way any wolf building a claim to leadership would need to prove their strength before the pack would follow them. "Where do I start?" she asked. Grace studied her for a moment, then reached into the folds of her robe and withdrew a small folded piece of paper. "Talk to Marcus Whitlock, the beta. He has served beside Damon for years and knows this pack's history better than anyone besides myself. If there is a pattern to be found, he will help you see it, provided you approach him honestly." Elena took the paper, though it was blank, and understood it was less a message and more a gesture, a way of telling her the conversation was over for now. She thanked Grace and left the hall, her mind already turning toward the beta's quarters on the eastern side of the pack grounds. Marcus Whitlock was a tall man with graying hair at his temples, and the kind of quiet, steady presence that made him easy to trust. He had served as beta under Damon's father before Damon himself became alpha, and he had remained loyal through every transition, every crisis, every difficult decision the pack had faced over the years. Elena found him near the training grounds, overseeing a group of younger wolves practicing formation drills. He noticed her approach immediately, and dismissed the trainees with a short wave, turning to face her with an expression that told Elena he already knew something was wrong. "Luna," he said, using the formal title even though they had known each other for years before her marriage. "You look like someone who has not slept." "I have not," Elena admitted. "I need to talk to you about something. Somewhere private, if possible." Marcus led her to a quiet bench near the edge of the training grounds, away from where anyone might overhear. Elena told him everything, the same way she had told Grace, watching his reaction closely as she spoke. Unlike Grace, Marcus did not manage to keep his expression neutral. His jaw tightened as she described finding Damon and Bree together, and by the time she finished, his hands had curled into fists resting on his knees. "I should have said something sooner," he muttered, more to himself than to Elena. "Said something about what?" Elena asked immediately, her heart quickening. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. Over the past few months, while the wedding was being planned, Bree spent a great deal of time here at the pack house. More time than seemed necessary for a sister helping with arrangements. I noticed Damon seeking her out during meetings that had nothing to do with wedding planning. I told myself it was innocent, that they were simply becoming close as future family. I did not want to believe it was anything more than that. Elena felt her stomach twist painfully. You saw this happening and said nothing? I had no proof of anything wrong, Marcus said, his voice heavy with something close to guilt. Only a feeling, and feelings are not something I could bring before the council to challenge my alpha's judgment. I am sorry, Elena. I should have trusted my instincts and warned you privately at least. Elena sat in silence for a moment, absorbing this new information. It confirmed what she had already begun to suspect, that whatever had happened between Damon and Bree had not been a single moment of confusion, but something built slowly over months, hidden carefully from everyone, including her. I need your help, she said finally. Grace told me I will need more than my word to bring this before the full council. I need to understand exactly what happened, how long this has been going on, and whether anyone else noticed signs before I did. Marcus nodded slowly. I can help you gather what I know, and I can speak to others who may have noticed things they dismissed, the same way I did. But Elena, I want you to understand something. Even with evidence, challenging an alpha's personal choices is not simple. The pack will be divided. Some will support you out of loyalty to your position as Luna. Others will be reluctant to weaken Damon's authority during a time when the pack needs stability. I am not trying to weaken the pack, Elena said firmly. I am trying to understand what happened to my marriage before it was even a full day old. Marcus studied her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering across his weathered face. You remind me of your mother, he said quietly. She never backed down from difficult truths either. Elena felt a small, unexpected warmth at the mention of her mother, who had passed several years earlier, but had once been respected throughout the region for her fairness and her strength. Then help me find the truth, the way she would have wanted. Over the following hours, Marcus introduced Elena to several pack members who had worked closely with the wedding preparations, carefully framing his questions to avoid revealing too much about why he was asking. A young wolf named Nathan, who had helped coordinate the seating arrangements for the reception, mentioned offhandedly that Bree had specifically requested to be seated near the head table, closer to Damon than tradition usually allowed for a sibling of the bride. A woman named Sophie, who worked in the pack kitchens, recalled Bree visiting the kitchen late at night during the final week of preparations, claiming she wanted to check on menu details, though Sophie had found it strange, since Bree had shown little interest in the wedding planning before that point. During one of those visits, Sophie had seen Damon stop by as well, the two of them talking quietly near the back door for nearly 20 minutes. None of these details, on their own, proved anything definitive. But together, they painted a picture Elena had not wanted to see, a slow pattern of closeness building between her sister and her husband, long before the wedding night confusion Damon had described. By the time evening fell, Elena sat with Marcus in his private study, staring at a small collection of notes they had gathered throughout the day. This is not enough to prove intent, Marcus admitted, looking over the notes with a frown. But it is enough to show that whatever happened last night was not sudden, not the kind of confusion Damon claims. Elena nodded, feeling exhausted but strangely resolved. Then I need to talk to Bree directly. Alone, without Damon there to smooth over her answers. Marcus hesitated. Are you certain that is wise? Confronting her alone, without witnesses, could leave you vulnerable if she decides to twist the conversation against you later. I understand the risk, Elena said. But I need to hear what she says when there is no one else in the room to protect her. I need to see her face when she is not performing for an audience. Marcus studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. Then I will make sure someone knows where you are and when to expect you back. I will not let you walk into that conversation completely alone, even if Bree does not know I am watching from a distance. Elena thanked him, grateful for the quiet loyalty he had shown her throughout the day, loyalty she had not expected, but deeply needed, given how uncertain everything else in her life had suddenly become. As she left his study and walked back toward the main pack house, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep red, the kind of beautiful evening that felt cruelly out of place, given everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. She found Bree in the garden behind the pack house, sitting alone on a stone bench, staring out at the fading light. For a moment, Elena simply watched her sister from a distance, remembering countless evenings they had spent together as children, sharing secrets and laughter beneath skies just like this one. That memory felt like it belonged to a different life now, one that had ended the moment Elena opened a bedroom door and found her whole world rearranged. She took a steadying breath and walked forward, ready to demand the truth from the only person who could give it to her honestly, if honesty was something her sister was still capable of offering. Bree looked up as Elena approached, and for a brief moment, something like fear crossed her face before she managed to smooth it into a careful, practiced calm. She had always been good at that, Elena thought, good at controlling exactly what her expression showed to the world. "Elena," Bree said softly, shifting slightly on the bench as if inviting her sister to sit. "I have been hoping we could talk properly." Elena remained standing, arms crossed, keeping distance between them. "Then talk. I want to hear everything, and I want to hear it without Damon standing beside you, softening your words." Bree's fingers twisted together in her lap, a nervous habit Elena remembered from childhood, the same motion Bree had always made, whenever she was about to say something she knew was not entirely true. "I do not know what more I can tell you. What happened, happened. None of us planned it." "You keep saying that," Elena said, her voice sharper now. "None of us planned it. It was fate. It was confusion. But I spent today talking to people who noticed you spending unusual amounts of time with Damon during the wedding preparations, requesting to sit closer to him at the reception. Visiting him late at night under the excuse of checking menu details. Does any of that sound like something that simply happened without planning?" Bree's face went pale, the careful calm cracking slightly at the edges. "Who told you that?" "Does it matter?" Elena asked. "Is it true?" For a long moment, Bree said nothing, staring down at her hands. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes, though Elena found herself unable to feel the sympathy those tears might have once earned. "I did not mean for it to happen," Bree said quietly. "At first, I only wanted to help with the wedding. But the more time I spent with Damon, the more I felt something I did not expect to feel. I tried to ignore it, Elena. I promised myself I would never act on it, that I would let you have your happiness even if it hurt me to watch." "But you did not let me have my happiness," Elena said, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "You went to his room, on my wedding night. Whatever feelings you were struggling with, you had a choice, Bree. You chose this." Bree flinched at the directness of the accusation, but did not deny it. "He came to me," she said instead, her voice growing defensive. "I did not seek him out that night. He found me." "And why would he come find you?" Elena asked. "Unless something had already been building between you long before that night. You are not describing a sudden, uncontrollable pull. You are describing months of choices, made carefully, hidden from me while I planned a wedding I believed was built on trust." Bree stood from the bench now, her composure fully cracking, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. "What do you want me to say, Elena? That I am sorry? I am sorry. I never wanted to hurt you, but I also cannot apologize for feelings I could not control, no matter how much I tried." "You could control your actions," Elena said firmly. "Feelings are not choices, Bree, but what you do with them is. You chose to keep this from me for months. You chose to walk into his room on the one night that was supposed to belong entirely to me. Those were choices, not fate, and I will not let you hide behind pretty words about destiny to avoid taking responsibility for them." The garden fell silent, except for the soft rustle of evening wind through the trees. Bree wiped at her tears, her expression shifting from sadness into something colder, something that reminded Elena uncomfortably of the calculation she had noticed the previous night. "You have always gotten everything you wanted," Bree said quietly, her voice trembling with an emotion Elena had never fully understood until this moment. "The Luna position, the Pack's respect, and now Damon. Did you ever consider that maybe, for once, I wanted something for myself, and I was tired of watching you take it without even trying?" Elena felt something cold settle over her at those words. This was not about sudden feelings or uncontrollable instincts. This had never been about fate at all. This was about resentment that had been building inside her sister for years, resentment Elena had never fully seen or understood until it exploded into betrayal on the worst possible night. "So this was never an accident," Elena said slowly, the pieces finally clicking into place. "You wanted this. You wanted him, or perhaps you simply wanted to take something from me. Either way, You let me walk down that aisle, believing I was marrying a man who loved me, while you had already decided to destroy it. Bree did not deny it this time. She simply stood there, tears still on her cheeks, saying nothing, and that silence told Elena more than any explanation could have. Elena turned and walked away without another word, leaving her sister standing alone in the darkening garden. She did not run, though every instinct told her to. She walked steadily, deliberately, refusing to let Bree see how deeply those final words had cut, refusing to give her sister the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. She found Marcus waiting near the edge of the garden, exactly where he said he would be, his expression grim as he studied her face. I take it the conversation did not go well, he said carefully. It went exactly as it needed to, Elena replied, her voice steady, despite the storm raging inside her. She admitted it was not sudden. She admitted there was resentment behind it, not fate. I have what I need to bring this before the full council. Marcus nodded slowly, though concern remained etched across his features. Are you certain you want to proceed with a formal hearing? Once you take this before the council, there is no quiet way to resolve it. The entire pack will know. The entire pack already suspects something happened, Elena said. I would rather they know the truth than whatever version Damon and Bree decide to tell them if I stay silent. They walked back toward the main pack house together, and as they approached, Elena noticed Damon standing near the entrance, clearly waiting for her. His expression was tired, worn in a way that suggested he had not slept either, though Elena found it difficult to summon any sympathy for him now. Elena, he said as she approached, his voice careful. We need to talk, properly, without anyone listening. I am done talking privately, Elena said, stopping a few feet away from him, refusing to let him close the distance further. I spoke with Bree. She told me the truth, or at least more of it than you offered last night. This was not confusion, Damon. This was something you allowed to build for months, something you chose to act on despite knowing exactly what you were doing. Damon's jaw tightened, and for a moment Elena thought he might try to deny it again, might try to return to his explanation about scent confusion and uncontrollable instincts. Instead, something in his posture seemed to deflate slightly, as though the weight of maintaining that lie had finally become too heavy. I never meant for any of this to happen the way it did, he said quietly. I care about you, Elena. I do. But something changed when Bree and I spent so much time together during the planning. I tried to push it aside, told myself it meant nothing, but by the time our wedding arrived, I could not stop thinking about her, even as I stood across from you at the altar. Elena felt something inside her chest crack at those words, not from the pain of losing him, but from the realization of just how thoroughly she had been deceived. You stood in front of the entire pack, she said, her voice trembling despite her attempts to keep it steady, and promised yourself to me, while already knowing you wanted someone else. I hoped it would fade, Damon said, his voice barely above a whisper. I hoped that once we were bound, the feelings for Bree would settle, that our bond would be enough. But that night, seeing her again, I could not control myself. That is not an excuse, Elena said sharply. That is a confession that you married me while already choosing someone else in your heart. You let me believe in something that was already broken before it began. Damon had no response to that. He simply stood there, guilt written plainly across his face, offering no further defense because there was none left to offer. Elena looked at him for a long moment, searching for any trace of the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once made her believe in promises and loyalty, and forever. She was not certain, standing there in the fading evening light, whether that man had ever truly existed, or whether she had simply seen what she wanted to see. I am bringing this before the full council, she said finally, her voice regaining its steadiness. I will not stand quietly while you and Bree decide how this story gets told. The pack deserves the truth, and so do I. She did not wait for his response. She turned and walked into the pack house, leaving both Damon and Marcus standing outside in the deepening darkness. As she made her way toward her room, Elena felt the weight of everything that had happened over the past 2 days, settling fully onto her shoulders for the first time. Her wedding, her marriage, her belief in trust and loyalty, all of it had crumbled faster than she ever could have imagined. But beneath the grief and the anger, something else was beginning to form inside her, something steady and resolved. She was not going to simply accept whatever fate her husband and sister had decided for her. She was going to demand accountability, and if the pack refused to give her the justice she deserved, she would find another way forward, even if that meant leaving everything she had ever known behind. That night, Elena sat alone in the Alpha's chambers, staring at the wedding dress still hanging on the chair, and for the first time since discovering the truth, she allowed herself to cry, quietly, deeply, mourning not just her marriage, but the sister she had lost long before she ever realized it. When the tears finally stopped, she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and began planning exactly what she would say when she stood before the full council in the morning. The council chamber was full by mid-morning, every seat along the long wooden benches occupied by pack members, eager to understand why a formal hearing had been called only 2 days after the Alpha's wedding. Whispers filled the room as Elena entered, wearing simple clothes instead of anything ceremonial, her expression calm despite the storm of nerves twisting inside her stomach. Grace Whitmore sat at the head of the council table, flanked by 4 other elders, whose names Elena knew well from years of pack gatherings. Marcus stood near the side of the room, close enough to offer support without overstepping his role as beta. Damon sat at the opposite end of the table from Elena, his expression unreadable, while Bree sat several rows back among the general pack members, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Grace called the room to order with a single raised hand, and the whispers faded into silence. "We are gathered today because our Luna has requested a formal hearing regarding events that occurred on the night of her binding ceremony. Elena, you may begin." Elena rose from her seat, her heart pounding, and turned to face the room full of expectant faces. She had spent the previous night preparing exactly what she wanted to say, careful to present facts rather than raw emotion, though she suspected emotion would inevitably bleed through regardless of how carefully she chose her words. "2 nights ago," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber, "I woke on what should have been the happiest night of my life, to find my husband missing from our bed. Following the pull of our newly formed bond, I discovered him in a private room with my sister Bree. When I confronted them, I was told this was the result of confused instincts, that the bond had mistakenly shifted due to scent similarities between siblings." She paused, letting the words settle over the room before continuing. "I have since learned this explanation was not truthful. Through conversations with pack members who witnessed months of unusual closeness between Damon and Bree during our wedding preparations, and through a direct conversation with my sister herself, I have confirmed that what happened was not sudden confusion, but a choice built over time, hidden carefully from me until it could no longer be concealed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Elena saw several elders exchange concerned glances. She continued, describing the details Marcus had helped her gather, the seating requests, the late-night kitchen visits, the pattern of closeness that had developed long before the wedding itself. She spoke carefully, avoiding exaggeration, presenting only what she could support with witnesses or direct admissions. When she finished, Grace turned to Damon, her expression stern. "Alpha Cole, do you dispute this account?" Damon rose slowly from his seat, and for a moment, Elena wondered if he would attempt to maintain his original lie, if he would try to salvage his reputation by continuing to claim confused instincts rather than deliberate choice. But when he spoke, his voice carried a heaviness that suggested he had finally accepted there was no path forward that did not involve some form of honesty. "I do not dispute it," he said quietly. "What Elena has described is accurate. I allowed feelings to develop that I should have controlled, and I made a choice on our wedding night that I deeply regret. I offered an explanation about confused instincts because I was afraid of what the truth would mean, both for my marriage and for my position within this pack." A wave of reaction moved through the crowd, some gasps, some angry murmurs, and Elena watched as the pack's perception of their alpha visibly shifted before her eyes. Grace held up a hand again, calling for silence, before turning her attention toward Bree, who had gone very pale in her seat. "Bree Voss," Grace said, her voice carrying the full weight of her authority. "Do you have anything to add to this account?" Bree rose slowly, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. For a moment, Elena thought her sister might try once more to frame the situation as an accident of fate, the same excuse she had offered in the garden. Instead, Perhaps recognizing that Damon's admission had already destroyed any chance of maintaining that story, Bree simply nodded. "It is true," she said quietly. "I allowed feelings for Damon to grow during the wedding preparations, and I did not stop them, even knowing what it would mean for my sister. I take responsibility for my choices." The chamber fell into a heavy silence following her admission. Elena stood at the front of the room, feeling strangely hollow, now that the truth had been fully confirmed in front of the entire pack. Part of her had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that there would be some explanation that made sense of everything, some detail that would soften the betrayal into something more forgivable. Instead, she was left with only confirmation of exactly what she had feared, spoken aloud by the two people responsible. Grace conferred quietly with the other elders for several minutes, their voices too low for Elena to make out individual words. Finally, Grace turned back to address the room. "This council recognizes the severity of what has occurred. However, we must also recognize the complexity of the situation before us. Alpha Cole remains the leader of this pack, chosen through strength and lineage that this council cannot simply set aside. The question before us is not whether wrongdoing occurred, but what consequences are appropriate given the circumstances." Elena felt a flicker of frustration at those words, sensing already where this might lead. "With respect," she said, stepping forward before anyone could continue. "I did not call this hearing seeking punishment for Damon's position as Alpha. I called it seeking acknowledgement of the truth, which has now been given. What I seek beyond that is clarity about my own position within this pack, given everything that has happened." Grace studied her carefully. "What are you asking for, Elena?" Elena took a steadying breath, aware that every eye in the room was fixed on her, waiting for her answer. She had not fully decided, even now, exactly what she wanted the outcome to be. Part of her wanted to demand that Damon choose between her and Bree definitively, to force some resolution that would restore what had been broken. But even as that thought formed, she recognized how hollow it felt, how little she actually wanted to remain bound to a man who had already shown her exactly where his loyalty could be swayed. "I am not certain yet," she admitted honestly, "but I do not believe I can simply return to being Damon's wife as though nothing happened. The bond between us feels different now, damaged in a way I am not certain can be repaired. I need time to understand what that means, both for myself and for my position as Luna." The elders exchanged glances again, clearly uncertain how to respond to an answer that did not fit neatly into their usual procedures for handling pack disputes. Grace finally spoke, her voice measured and careful. "This council will grant you time to consider your position, Elena. In the meantime, we ask that all parties involved conduct themselves with restraint and avoid further complicating an already difficult situation." The hearing ended shortly after, the pack members slowly filing out of the chamber, whispers following Elena as she made her way toward the exit. She could feel the weight of their stares, some sympathetic, some curious, a few openly judgmental, as though her honesty about the situation somehow reflected poorly on her rather than on the two people who had actually caused the betrayal. Outside the chamber, Marcus caught up with her, his expression concerned. "Are you all right?" "I do not know," Elena admitted honestly. "I thought hearing them admit the truth would feel like some kind of victory, but it mostly just feels exhausting." "You handled yourself with more grace than most would have managed," Marcus said gently. "Whatever you decide to do next, you have this pack's respect for how you approached this situation." Elena appreciated the kind words, though she was not certain how true they were given the reactions she had noticed in the crowd. Not everyone had looked at her with sympathy. Some had looked at her the way people looked at someone who had caused trouble by refusing to quietly accept a difficult situation, as though her demand for honesty had been an inconvenience rather than a reasonable response to genuine betrayal. Over the following days, Elena noticed a subtle shift in how certain pack members treated her. While some, like Marcus and a handful of others who had grown close to her during her time as Luna, remained openly supportive, others became distant, unwilling to meet her eyes or engage in casual conversation the way they once had. She began to hear whispers, carried through the pack the way gossip always traveled, framing her as difficult, as someone who had embarrassed the Alpha publicly rather than someone who had simply demanded accountability for a genuine wrong. She confronted this shift directly one afternoon, while walking through the pack grounds. overhearing two younger wolves discussing the situation without realizing she was nearby. "I heard she practically forced the whole council hearing," one of them said quietly. "Could have handled it privately, instead of making the alpha look weak in front of everyone." Elena paused, feeling a familiar anger rising inside her chest, though she forced herself to keep walking, rather than confronting them directly. She recognized, with growing clarity, exactly what was happening. Damon's position as alpha gave him a kind of protection that she, as his wife, did not equally possess. Even having been wronged, even having spoken nothing but the truth, she was beginning to be reframed as the source of the pack's discomfort, rather than the person who had actually been betrayed. That evening, she sought out Grace once more, finding the elder in her private study, surrounded by old pack records. "I need to understand something," Elena said, taking a seat across from her. "Is it possible for the pack to turn against me, even though I did nothing wrong?" Grace looked up from her papers, her expression softening slightly with something like sympathy. "Pack loyalty is complicated, Elena. Damon has led this pack for years, and many wolves have built their sense of stability around his leadership. When that leadership is threatened or questioned, even for legitimate reasons, some will instinctively defend it rather than accept the discomfort of acknowledging its flaws. So they would rather believe I am the problem than accept that their alpha betrayed me," Elena said quietly, the realization settling heavily over her. "Not everyone," Grace clarified, "but enough that you should proceed carefully. If you intend to seek any further action beyond what has already occurred, you will need to be prepared for resistance, not just from Damon and Bree, but from parts of the pack that will prioritize stability over justice." Elena absorbed this information silently, feeling the walls of her situation narrowing around her. She had come into this pack believing in fairness, in the idea that truth mattered more than convenience. She was beginning to understand that not every wolf shared that belief, and that navigating the coming weeks would require more strategy and caution than she had initially anticipated. She thanked Grace and returned to her room, her mind turning over everything she had learned. Whatever she decided to do next, she understood now that she could not simply rely on the pack's sense of justice to protect her. If she wanted to reclaim any sense of power over her own future, she would need to find that strength within herself, without depending on a council that seemed increasingly reluctant to fully hold their alpha accountable. Word of the council hearing spread through the pack faster than Elena expected, and within a week, she found herself navigating a version of pack life that felt entirely unfamiliar. She had once walked through the grounds greeted warmly by nearly everyone she passed. Now, conversations paused when she approached, and though most wolves still offered polite nods, there was a new distance in their eyes, an uncertainty about how to treat a Luna whose marriage had so publicly fractured. Bree, by contrast, seemed to be recovering her footing within the pack far more quickly than Elena would have expected. She noticed her sister spending more time near Damon during pack gatherings, standing close enough to suggest a familiarity that the rest of the pack had already begun to notice and, apparently, begun to accept. It was as though the admission of wrongdoing during the council hearing had somehow been absorbed into the pack's collective memory and quietly set aside, replaced instead by a growing narrative that framed Bree as a woman who had simply followed her heart, however complicated the circumstances. Elena discovered just how far this shift had progressed one afternoon, when she overheard two pack elders discussing the situation near the training grounds. She had not meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried easily across the open space. "It is unfortunate, certainly," one elder said, "but perhaps it is for the best that the alpha's true feelings became clear early, rather than after years of an unhappy marriage. Bree seems a suitable match, given how naturally she has stepped into supporting his responsibilities." "And Elena?" the other elder asked. "Elena has handled the situation with more emotion than perhaps was necessary," the first elder replied. "A more experienced Luna might have addressed this privately rather than involving the full council. It has created unnecessary division within the pack at a time when we needed stability." Elena stood frozen behind a nearby tree, her hands curling into fists at her sides, as she listened to her pain being repackaged as an inconvenience, her honesty being reframed as instability. She had known, since her conversation with Grace, that this kind of thinking existed within parts of the pack, but hearing it spoken so casually, so dismissively, struck her far harder than she expected. She waited until the elders moved on before stepping out from behind the tree, her chest tight with a mixture of anger and something closer to despair. She had believed when she first married Damon that becoming Luna meant becoming part of something larger than herself, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. She was beginning to understand that within this pack, at least among certain members, her value seemed tied entirely to her usefulness in maintaining stability, regardless of what that stability cost her personally. She sought out Marcus later that day, finding him in his usual place near the training grounds, and relayed what she had overheard. His expression darkened as she spoke, though he did not seem entirely surprised. "There has always been a faction within this pack that prioritizes convenience over principle," he said grimly. "I had hoped they would remain a minority, but it seems Bree and Damon have been working to shift opinion in their favor since the hearing." "Working how?" Elena asked. "Small things," Marcus explained. "Bree has been visible at pack gatherings, offering help with tasks, presenting herself as steady and supportive rather than the source of conflict. Damon has been careful to project confidence and control, framing the situation as a difficult but resolved matter rather than an ongoing crisis. Together, they are slowly rewriting the narrative in their favor, and unfortunately, some members of the pack are willing to accept whatever version requires the least discomfort." Elena felt something harden inside her as she listened, a resolve forming that had not fully existed before this moment. She had spent the past week trying to navigate this situation with patience, hoping that truth alone would be enough to secure some form of justice, or at least basic respect. She was beginning to understand that truth, on its own, was not enough. Not within a system where power and convenience could so easily overshadow honesty. "What are my options?" she asked Marcus directly. "If the pack is unwilling to hold Damon fully accountable, and if Bree is being allowed to quietly step into a role beside him, what does that leave for me?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his words carefully before answering. "Officially, you remain Luna until you choose otherwise, or until the council formally decides your position has changed. Damon cannot simply set you aside without consequence, not without violating the very bonds that hold this pack together. But practically speaking, if enough of the pack begins to view you as an obstacle rather than their leader, your position could become increasingly difficult to maintain, regardless of what the formal rules technically allow." Elena absorbed this, feeling the walls around her situation narrowing further. She thought about the mate bond still lingering faintly in her chest, though it had grown steadily colder and more distant since the wedding night, as though her wolf instinctively understood that whatever connection had once existed was no longer something worth maintaining. She thought about the years stretching ahead of her if she chose to remain, years spent navigating a pack that increasingly viewed her honesty as a burden rather than a virtue. "I need to think," she told Marcus finally. "I need time away from all of this, even if just for a few hours, to understand what I actually want moving forward." Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. "Take whatever time you need. I will make sure no one disturbs you unnecessarily." Elena left the pack house that evening, making her way toward the edge of the territory, where the forest grew dense and quiet, far from the whispers and watchful eyes that had become a constant presence within the pack grounds. She walked for nearly an hour, her mind turning over everything that had happened since her wedding night, until she finally reached a small clearing beside a slow-moving stream, a place she remembered visiting years earlier, long before she had ever imagined becoming Luna of this pack. She sat down on a large, flat stone near the water's edge, allowing herself, finally, a moment of complete stillness. The forest around her was quiet, except for the gentle sound of water moving over stones and the occasional call of an owl somewhere in the distance. She closed her eyes and focused on the mate bond still resting faintly in her chest, trying to understand exactly what she felt when she reached for it. There was no warmth there anymore, no sense of comfort or connection. Instead, there was only a dull, persistent ache, like an old wound that had never properly healed. She thought about the version of herself who had walked down the aisle only days earlier, so full of hope and certainty about the life she was beginning. That version of herself felt impossibly distant now, as though she belonged to someone else entirely. Elena opened her eyes and stared out at the water, watching it move steadily past her, never pausing, never hesitating, simply continuing forward regardless of what obstacles it encountered along its path. She thought about her mother, who Marcus had said she reminded him of, a woman who had never been afraid of difficult truths, who had led with both strength and honesty, even when it would have been easier to compromise. Sitting there in the quiet forest, Elena began to understand, slowly and with growing clarity, exactly what she needed to do next. She could not continue living within a bond that had already been broken by the very person meant to protect it. She could not continue existing within a pack that valued convenience over honesty, that was willing to slowly erase her pain in favor of a narrative that made everyone else more comfortable. Whatever came next, she needed to reclaim control over her own life, rather than allowing Damon, Bree, or even the Pack Council to decide her fate for her. She remained in the clearing until the stars began to appear overhead, allowing herself the space to fully process everything she had endured over the past week. When she finally rose to make her way back toward the pack house, her steps felt steadier than they had in days, guided now by a clarity of purpose that had been missing since the moment she discovered her husband's betrayal. She did not yet know exactly what breaking free from this situation would require, or what it would cost her, but she understood, walking back through the darkened forest, that she was no longer willing to simply wait and hope the pack would eventually choose to protect her. If justice was not going to be given to her freely, she would need to find her own path toward reclaiming her strength, even if that path led her away from everything she had once believed her future would hold. The pack archive was housed in a small stone building near the edge of the territory, rarely visited except by scholars and elders researching old pack law or historical records. Elena had passed the building countless times without ever stepping inside, but the morning after her night in the forest clearing, she found herself standing before its heavy wooden door, determined to learn everything she could about mate bonds, how they formed, and more importantly, whether they could be broken. Inside, the air smelled of old parchment and dust, shelves stretching from floor to ceiling filled with records dating back generations. An elderly woman named Vivian, who served as the archive's keeper, looked up from her desk as Elena entered, her expression curious. "Luna," she said, rising slowly from her chair, "it is unusual to see you here. How can I help you?" "I need to understand mate bonds," Elena said directly, deciding there was little point in dancing around her purpose. Specifically, whether they can be intentionally broken, and what that process would involve. Vivian's expression shifted into something more careful, more measured. "That is not a simple question, nor a common one. Breaking a mate bond is exceptionally rare, Elena. Most wolves who find themselves in difficult marriages simply endure, or in extreme cases, seek separation, while allowing the bond itself to naturally fade over years of distance. Deliberately severing an active bond is something almost no one attempts." "But it is possible," Elena pressed. "Is it not?" Vivian studied her for a long moment before finally nodding and gesturing for Elena to follow her deeper into the archive. They stopped before a shelf near the back of the building, and Vivian carefully withdrew a thick, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. "This contains records of the few known cases where a mate bond was intentionally severed," Vivian explained, setting the book down on a nearby table. "I must warn you, Elena, before you read further, that this process is not undertaken lightly. It is described in these records as extremely painful, both physically and emotionally, and in at least 2 documented cases, resulted in the wolf's death when the ritual was not properly completed." Elena felt a chill run through her at those words, but did not back away from the book. "I need to understand my options, Vivian. Even if this path proves too dangerous, I need to know it exists." Vivian nodded and opened the book carefully, turning to a section marked with careful, faded handwriting. Elena leaned forward, reading through descriptions of ancient rituals passed down through generations, ceremonies involving specific herbs, symbolic actions, and a period of intense focus, during which the wolf attempting to break the bond needed to fully commit to severing the connection, both mentally and physically. "The danger," Vivian explained as Elena read, "comes from the fact that a mate bond becomes deeply woven into a wolf's instincts once fully formed. Attempting to tear it away requires overcoming not just emotional attachment, but the very biological pull that connects 2 mates. Wolves who approach the ritual with hesitation, who are not fully committed to letting go, often suffer the most severe consequences, because the bond fights against the severing with everything the wolf's own body provides it. Elena continued reading, absorbing every detail she could about the process. According to the records, the ritual needed to be performed during a specific phase of the moon cycle, in a location the wolf considered sacred or personally significant, using a combination of silver and specific herbs known to weaken the biological pathways connecting mates. The process itself was described as excruciating, a pain unlike anything most wolves ever experienced, lasting anywhere from several minutes to several hours, depending on the strength of the original bond. Why would anyone choose this? Elena asked quietly, given how dangerous it sounds. Vivian's expression softened slightly. Because sometimes, Elena, remaining bonded to someone who has broken your trust becomes a slower, more agonizing death than the ritual itself. The wolves recorded in these pages who chose this path did so because they could no longer bear carrying a connection that caused them constant pain, even after the marriage itself had ended in every practical sense. They chose to reclaim their own instincts, their own hearts, rather than continue living tethered to someone who no longer deserved that connection. Elena sat back slightly, considering this. She thought about the dull ache still lingering in her chest, the way it pulled uncomfortably whenever she was near Damon, a constant reminder of a bond that had been betrayed before it ever had the chance to fully form into something meaningful. She thought about the years ahead of her if she chose to remain bonded, carrying that ache indefinitely, watching Bree slowly step into a role beside Damon, while Elena remained tethered to a connection that brought her nothing but pain. "I want to learn more," she said finally, "not necessarily to act immediately, but I want to understand every detail of this process before I decide anything." Vivian nodded and spent the next several hours walking Elena through the full history recorded in the archive, describing each documented case in careful detail, explaining the precautions that had proven necessary for survival, and the mistakes that had led to tragedy in the cases where wolves had died attempting the ritual. Elena listened carefully, memorizing every detail, understanding that if she ever chose to pursue this path, she would need to approach it with complete preparation and unwavering resolve. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Vivian mentioned one final detail that caught Elena's attention. "There is a woman living beyond the northern border, in territory that belongs to no pack. Her name is Ivy, and she has spent decades studying bond rituals, both their formation and their severing. If you are serious about considering this path, she would be able to guide you through the process far more thoroughly than these old records can." "How would I find her?" Elena asked. "She does not welcome visitors easily," Vivian warned. "But if you are genuine in your need, and if you approach with respect, she has been known to help those who come to her with legitimate reasons. I can provide directions, if you are certain you wish to pursue this." Elena considered this for a long moment, weighing the magnitude of what she was contemplating. Breaking a mate bond was not a decision to be made lightly, nor one she could easily reverse once completed. But sitting there in the quiet archive, surrounded by centuries of pack history, she found herself returning again and again to the same conclusion. She could not continue living bonded to a man who had betrayed her before their marriage had even properly begun, especially not within a pack that seemed increasingly willing to excuse that betrayal for the sake of convenience. "Yes," she said finally, "I want the directions." Vivian nodded and retrieved a small hand-drawn map from a nearby drawer, marking a path that led beyond the pack's northern border into territory Elena had never explored. "Be careful," Vivian said, handing her the map. "The land beyond our border is not protected by any pack's authority. Travel during daylight, and do not linger longer than necessary." Elena thanked her and left the archive as the sun began to set, the map carefully folded and tucked into her pocket. She made her way back toward the pack house, her mind already turning toward the journey ahead, knowing that whatever she decided in the coming days would fundamentally reshape the rest of her life. That evening, she found Marcus and explained, carefully and without revealing every detail, that she needed to travel beyond the pack's border for a few days, to seek guidance from someone with specialized knowledge relevant to her situation. Marcus, though clearly concerned, did not press her for more information than she was willing to share, instead offering to arrange a small escort to ensure her safety during the journey. "I need to go alone," Elena told him gently. This is something I need to face on my own terms. Marcus studied her for a long moment, before finally nodding, understanding, perhaps, that Elena needed this journey to belong entirely to herself, free from the influence of pack politics or anyone else's expectations. Be careful, he said simply. And Elena, whatever you decide out there, know that you have earned the right to choose your own path forward, regardless of what anyone else believes you should do. Elena thanked him, grateful for his continued support throughout everything that had happened, and returned to her room to prepare for the journey ahead. As she packed a small bag with supplies for the days ahead, she felt something shift inside her, a sense of purpose beginning to replace the numb devastation that had defined the past week. Whatever waited for her beyond the northern border, she was finally taking active steps toward reclaiming control over her own future, rather than simply waiting for others to decide her fate. She left before dawn the following morning, the pack house still quiet as she slipped out through the eastern gate, the small map tucked securely in her pocket, and her resolve growing stronger with every step she took away from the place that had once felt like home. The journey beyond the northern border took Elena nearly a full day of steady walking, following Vivian's map through unfamiliar terrain that grew increasingly wild the further she traveled from Ashwood territory. The forest here felt different, older somehow, the trees taller and more tangled, the air carrying scents she did not recognize. She kept her senses sharp throughout the journey, aware that unclaimed land often meant unpredictable dangers, but she encountered nothing more troubling than the occasional distant howl echoing through the trees. As the sun began to set on the second day, Elena finally spotted the small cabin Vivian had described, nestled within a quiet clearing, surrounded by tall pine trees. Smoke curled gently from a stone chimney, and warm light glowed from a single window facing the small dirt path leading up to the door. Elena approached carefully, remembering Vivian's warning about respect, and knocked gently on the wooden door. It took a long moment before the door opened, revealing a woman who appeared far older than Elena expected, though her eyes held a sharpness that suggested age had done nothing to dull her mind. Her silver hair was pulled back in a simple braid, and she studied Elena with the kind of careful assessment that made Elena feel as though every detail of her situation was already being understood before she spoke a single word. "You are the Luna from Ashwood," the woman said, her voice carrying a quiet certainty. "I am Ivy. Vivian sent word ahead that you might be traveling this way." Elena felt a small flicker of surprise. She sent word. I did not realize that was possible, given the distance. Ivy's expression softened slightly, something close to amusement crossing her weathered features. "There are ways of communicating across territories that do not rely on physical distance, Elena. Come inside. You look as though you have walked a long way, and we have much to discuss." The interior of the cabin was simple but warm, filled with shelves of dried herbs, old books, and the comforting smell of something cooking over the fire. Ivy gestured for Elena to sit at a small wooden table near the hearth, offering her a cup of tea before settling into the chair across from her. "Tell me why you have come," Ivy said, though her tone suggested she already understood the general shape of the answer. Elena explained everything, from the wedding night discovery, to the council hearing, to the growing sense that the pack was slowly reshaping the situation into something more comfortable for Damon and Bree, while leaving her increasingly isolated. She explained her research in the archive, her understanding of the bond-severing ritual, and her decision to seek Ivy's guidance before attempting anything so dangerous. Ivy listened without interrupting, her expression thoughtful throughout the entire explanation. When Elena finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment, studying her carefully. "You understand the danger involved," Ivy said finally. "This is not something to be attempted out of anger or impulsive pain, Elena. The ritual requires complete clarity of purpose. If you approach it while still holding on to hope that Damon might change, or while your heart remains conflicted about severing the connection, the bond will fight against you, and the consequences could be severe." "I understand," Elena said firmly. "I have had days to sit with this decision. I am not acting out of impulse. I am acting because I refuse to spend the rest of my life connected to someone who chose betrayal over loyalty, especially within a pack that seems more interested in protecting his reputation than acknowledging what he did to me." Ivy studied her for a long moment, as though testing the sincerity behind her words, before finally nodding slowly. Then, I will help you prepare properly. But first, I want you to understand something important. Breaking this bond will not erase what happened to you, nor will it undo the pain you have carried these past days. What it will do is free your instincts, your wolf, from being tethered to someone who no longer deserves that connection. The healing that follows will still require time and patience, regardless of how the ritual itself unfolds. Elena nodded, absorbing this. I am not looking for a quick fix to my pain. I am looking to reclaim control over my own life, rather than remaining trapped by a bond built on a lie. Something like respect flickered across Ivy's face at those words. Then we will begin preparations tomorrow. Tonight, rest. Tomorrow we start. Elena spent that night in a small guest room within Ivy's cabin, sleeping more soundly than she had in days despite the uncertainty of what lay ahead. She woke early the following morning to find Ivy already awake, gathering herbs and materials from her shelves, laying them carefully across the wooden table. The ritual requires several specific components, Ivy explained as Elena joined her. Silver, to weaken the biological pathways of the bond, a particular herb called moonroot, which grows only in specific conditions and helps ease the physical pain of severing. And most importantly, complete focus and intention from you throughout the entire process. Over the following 2 days, Ivy walked Elena through everything she would need to understand, explaining the significance of each step, preparing her both physically and mentally for what the ritual would demand. She taught Elena breathing techniques meant to help her stay grounded through the pain, explained the symbolic actions that would accompany the physical severing, and repeatedly emphasized the importance of Elena's complete mental commitment throughout the process. The moment you begin, Ivy warned during their final preparation session, there can be no hesitation. Once the ritual starts, stopping partway through is far more dangerous than either completing it or never beginning at all. You must be entirely certain before we proceed. Elena thought about Damon's face during the council hearing, the guilt that had flickered across his features when he finally admitted the truth, followed almost immediately by his continued closeness with Bree in the days since. She thought about the whispers among pack members, the subtle reframing of her pain into inconvenience, the growing sense that remaining within that pack, bonded to that man, would mean slowly disappearing beneath a narrative that was not her own. I am certain, she said, her voice steady and resolved. I am ready. Ivy studied her for a long moment before finally nodding. Then we will perform the ritual tomorrow night, when the moon reaches its proper phase. Rest today, Elena, and prepare yourself mentally for what is to come. Tomorrow, you will finally be free. Elena spent the remainder of that day walking through the forest surrounding Ivy's cabin, using the quiet solitude to fully process everything she was about to undertake. She thought about her childhood dreams of becoming Luna, about the joy she had felt on her wedding day before everything shattered, about the pain of discovering Damon's betrayal, and the slower, more insidious pain of watching her own pack begin to excuse it. She thought too about the future waiting beyond this moment, uncertain and frightening in its openness, but also carrying a kind of freedom she had not allowed herself to fully imagine until now. Whatever came next, she would face it without the weight of a broken bond pulling constantly at her chest, without the biological instinct connecting her to a man who had chosen someone else before their marriage had even properly begun. As evening fell and she made her way back toward the cabin, Elena felt a strange calm settling over her, the kind of stillness that came from finally committing fully to a difficult decision. Tomorrow night, she would sever the bond that had brought her nothing but pain since her wedding night. Tomorrow night, she would take the first true step toward reclaiming her own life, regardless of how much it might hurt in the process. Before proceeding with the ritual, Ivy insisted on one final step, something she explained was not strictly necessary, but that she strongly recommended for Elena's own sense of closure. Some wolves who have undertaken this ritual in the past regretted not speaking directly to their former mate one final time before severing the connection, Ivy explained as they sat together on the morning before the ritual was scheduled to take place. Not to seek reconciliation, but simply to close that chapter with full honesty, so that no lingering questions remained to haunt you afterward. Elena considered this carefully. Part of her wanted nothing more than to complete the ritual and leave her entire connection to Damon behind without another conversation. without giving him another opportunity to offer excuses or half-hearted apologies. But another part of her recognized the wisdom in Ivy's suggestion. She did not want to carry unresolved questions into whatever future awaited her beyond this moment. I will send word through Marcus, Elena decided, asking Damon to meet me at the border tomorrow, before the ritual takes place at nightfall. Ivy nodded approvingly and helped Elena arrange for a message to be sent back toward Ashwood territory, carried by a young messenger wolf who occasionally passed through this region, delivering communications between the scattered settlements beyond pack boundaries. The message simply requested that Damon meet her at the northern border the following afternoon, without explaining further details about her reasons. The following day arrived with a heaviness that Elena felt settling over her shoulders as she made her way toward the designated meeting point, a small clearing near the border between Ashwood territory and the unclaimed lands beyond. She arrived early, using the quiet moments before Damon's expected arrival to steady her thoughts and prepare herself for whatever this final conversation might bring. Damon appeared exactly on time, walking alone through the trees, his expression carrying a mixture of confusion and cautious hope that made Elena's chest tighten uncomfortably. He had clearly interpreted her request for a meeting as a possible opening for reconciliation, and she felt a brief pang of guilt for not clarifying her intentions more clearly in her message. "Elena," he said as he approached, relief evident in his voice, "I have been so worried since you left. No one would tell me where you had gone." "I needed space to think clearly," Elena said, keeping her voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "I asked you here because I wanted to speak with you honestly, one final time, before I decide how to move forward." Something in her tone must have alerted him to the seriousness of what was coming, because his expression shifted, the hope fading into something more uncertain. "What do you mean, one final time?" Elena took a steadying breath. "I have spent the past several days learning about our bond, Damon, about what it means and what it requires. I have come to understand that I cannot continue living connected to someone who chose to betray that connection before it even had the chance to properly form. I am not here to ask you to choose between me and Bree, or to offer you another opportunity to make excuses. I am here because I needed to see you clearly, one last time, before I let go completely." Damon's face paled as understanding dawned. "Let go completely? Elena, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I intend to sever our mate bond," Elena said plainly, watching his reaction carefully. "I have found someone who can guide me through the process safely, and I intend to complete the ritual tonight." For a long moment, Damon simply stared at her, clearly struggling to process what she had told him. "Elena, that ritual is dangerous. People have died attempting it. Please, we can find another way to work through this, without you risking your life. You do not have the right to worry about my safety now," Elena said, her voice hardening slightly, despite her efforts to remain calm. "You should have thought about protecting what we had before you walked into Bree's room on our wedding night. I am not asking for your permission, Damon. I am simply giving you the chance to say whatever needs to be said before this bond is gone forever." Damon was quiet for a long moment, his expression cycling through several emotions, before finally settling into something that looked like genuine grief. "I do not know what to say that would fix any of this," he admitted quietly. "I know I hurt you in a way that cannot easily be undone. I know I made choices that I will regret for the rest of my life. If severing this bond is what you need to move forward, then I will not stand in your way, even though it breaks my heart to hear you say it." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any trace of manipulation in his words, any attempt to guilt her into changing her decision. But what she saw instead was simple, resigned sorrow, the recognition that he had lost something precious through his own actions, and that no amount of regret could undo the consequences now unfolding. "I hope you find happiness," Elena said finally, surprising herself with how genuinely she meant those words. "With Bree, or with whatever future you build for yourself. But that happiness will not include me any longer, not as your bonded mate, and eventually, not even as a member of this pack." Damon's eyes widened slightly at that final statement. "You intend to leave the pack entirely?" "I have not decided everything yet," Elena admitted. "But I know I cannot remain here, watching you and Bree build a life together, while pack members whisper about how I overreacted to a simple mistake. I deserve better than that, even if this pack is not currently willing to give it to me. They stood together in silence for several long moments, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavily between them. Finally, Damon nodded slowly, seeming to accept, at least in that moment, that there was nothing more he could say or do to change the course Elena had chosen. "I am sorry, Elena," he said quietly, "for everything. I know those words mean very little now, but I want you to know that I did care about you, even if I failed you in the worst possible way." "I believe you cared," Elena said honestly, "but caring was not enough to stop you from making the choice you made. I hope, someday, you understand the full weight of what that choice cost, not just for me, but for the kind of alpha and person you could have been." She turned then, without waiting for any further response, and began walking back toward the path that would lead her to Ivy's cabin, leaving Damon standing alone in the clearing behind her. She did not look back, though she could feel his eyes following her until the trees finally obscured her from view. By the time she reached the cabin, the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the small clearing where Ivy waited, already gathering the final materials needed for the ritual. Elena felt a strange lightness settling over her, despite the heaviness of the conversation she had just endured, as though speaking those final words to Damon had already begun the process of releasing something she had been carrying since her wedding night. "How did it go?" Ivy asked as Elena approached. "As well as it could have, I suppose," Elena replied. "I said what I needed to say. He accepted that I have made my decision. I feel ready, Ivy. More ready than I have felt since this entire situation began." Ivy studied her carefully, searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt, and seemingly finding none, nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Then let us prepare. The moon will reach its proper position within a few hours. We have time to complete the final preparations before we begin." Elena followed Ivy inside the cabin, watching as the older woman carefully arranged the herbs, silver, and other materials needed for the ritual, her movements precise and practiced, despite the gravity of what they were about to undertake. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, Elena felt her resolve settling more firmly into place. Every conversation, every painful discovery of the past week, converging into this single moment of decisive action. Tonight, she would finally sever the connection that had brought her nothing but pain since the moment she discovered her husband's betrayal. Tonight, she would take the final step toward reclaiming a life that belonged entirely to herself, regardless of the uncertainty and challenges that surely waited for her on the other side of this difficult, necessary choice. As darkness settled fully over the forest, Ivy led Elena to a small clearing behind the cabin, one she explained had been used for such rituals for generations, the ground marked faintly with old symbols worn smooth by years of weather and time. The moon hung high overhead, nearly full, casting silver light across the clearing in a way that felt almost ceremonial, as though the natural world itself understood the significance of what was about to occur. "Sit here," Ivy instructed, gesturing toward the center of the clearing, where a simple woven mat had been placed. "We will begin by grounding your focus, ensuring your mind is fully present before we proceed to the physical elements of the ritual." Elena settled onto the mat, crossing her legs and resting her hands on her knees, the way Ivy had taught her during their practice sessions over the past 2 days. Ivy knelt beside her, placing the gathered herbs and a small piece of silver wrapped carefully in cloth on the ground between them. "Close your eyes," Ivy said softly. "Breathe deeply and focus on the bond itself. I want you to feel it clearly, to understand exactly what you are choosing to release before we begin severing it." Elena obeyed, closing her eyes and turning her attention inward, searching for the familiar ache that had settled into her chest since her wedding night. She found it easily, a thread of connection that felt simultaneously fragile and stubbornly persistent, still tethering some deep instinctive part of her wolf to Damon, despite everything that had happened between them. "I feel it," she said quietly. "Good," Ivy replied. "Now I want you to think clearly about everything this bond represents, not just pain, but also what it once promised. Understanding both sides will help ensure your intention remains clear and complete when the severing begins." Elena allowed herself to remember the early days of her relationship with Damon, before the wedding, before everything shattered. She remembered his laughter, The way he had once looked at her with genuine warmth, the promises they had made to each other during their courtship. She allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she was choosing to release, the dreams she had once held for their future together, the family she had imagined building with him. Then she allowed herself to remember the wedding night, the empty bed, the voices behind Bree's door, the humiliation of watching her marriage collapse before it had even properly begun. She remembered the weeks of whispered judgment, the slow reshaping of her pain into inconvenience, the growing understanding that this pact, this bond, this life she had once envisioned, could no longer offer her the safety and respect she deserved. "I am ready," she said, opening her eyes to meet Ivy's steady gaze. "I understand fully what I am releasing, and I choose to release it." Ivy nodded and reached for the small piece of silver, unwrapping it carefully, before pressing it gently into Elena's palm. "This silver has been treated with specific properties that will help weaken the biological pathways connecting your bond to Damon. When I instruct you, you will hold this against your chest, directly over where you feel the connection strongest, and you will speak the words of release that we practiced together." Elena nodded, her heart beginning to pound as the moment approached. Ivy lit a small bundle of the moonroot herb, its smoke curling upward with a faint, earthy scent that Elena found strangely calming despite her mounting nerves. "Breathe in the smoke," Ivy instructed. "It will help ease the physical pain that follows. When you are ready, press the silver against your chest and begin." Elena breathed in slowly, allowing the fragrant smoke to fill her lungs, feeling a subtle warmth spreading through her body as she did so. She pressed the small piece of silver against her chest, directly over the spot where the ache of her broken bond had settled since her wedding night, and closed her eyes once more. "I release this bond," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor building beneath the surface. "Formed in trust, broken in betrayal. I choose to sever this connection, fully and completely, reclaiming my own heart and my own instincts." As she spoke the words, she felt something begin to shift deep within her chest, a tightening sensation that quickly intensified into something far more painful than she had anticipated, despite Ivy's careful warnings. She gasped, her hand pressing harder against the silver, continuing to speak the remaining words of the ritual, despite the growing agony spreading through her body. "I release you, Damon Cole, from any claim upon my instincts, my heart, and my future. This bond is broken, by my choice, and by my will." The moment she finished speaking, the pain intensified dramatically, a searing sensation that felt as though something deep within her chest was being physically torn apart. Elena cried out, her body curling forward as the agony overwhelmed her senses, every instinct screaming in protest against the deliberate severing occurring within her. "Stay with it," Ivy urged, her voice steady despite the alarm evident beneath her calm exterior. "Do not fight the pain, Elena. Let it move through you. Fighting it will only prolong the process." Elena forced herself to breathe despite the overwhelming agony, focusing on Ivy's voice as an anchor through the storm of pain crashing through her body. She felt the bond fighting against the severing, exactly as Ivy had warned, her wolf instincts desperately trying to maintain the connection, even as Elena's conscious will pushed forward with unwavering determination. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours to Elena as she knelt in the clearing, tears streaming down her face, her entire body trembling with the effort of enduring what felt like her very soul being pulled apart. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment, the betrayal, the humiliation, the slow erosion of respect from a pack that should have protected her. She held on to that resolve, using it as fuel to push through the pain, rather than allowing it to overwhelm her completely. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elena felt something shift dramatically within her chest, a sudden release unlike anything she had experienced before. The searing pain gave way abruptly to a strange, hollow emptiness, as though something that had been there for weeks had simply vanished, leaving behind only silence where the ache used to reside. She opened her eyes slowly, finding Ivy watching her with careful concern, ready to offer support if needed. "It is done," Ivy said quietly. "The bond has been severed. How do you feel?" Elena took a moment to fully assess herself, reaching inward toward the place where the connection to Damon had once existed. There was nothing there now, no warmth, no ache, no pull in any direction. Just an unfamiliar quiet, a stillness that felt strange after weeks of carrying that persistent, painful thread within her chest. "Empty," Elena said finally, her voice hoarse from the effort of enduring the ritual. "But also free. I do not feel connected to him anymore, not even in pain." Ivy nodded, helping Elena rise slowly from the mat, supporting her, as her legs remained unsteady from the physical toll the ritual had taken on her body. "The emptiness will fade with time," Ivy explained gently. "What you are feeling now is simply the absence of a connection that had been part of your instincts for weeks. Your wolf will adjust, slowly, and in its place, you will begin to rebuild a sense of self that belongs entirely to you, unshaped by any external bond." Elena allowed Ivy to help her back into the cabin, settling gratefully onto a chair near the fire as exhaustion, both physical and emotional, settled heavily over her. Despite the lingering weakness in her body, she felt something else beginning to take shape beneath the exhaustion, a quiet sense of accomplishment, of having survived something incredibly difficult and emerged on the other side, finally free from the connection that had caused her so much pain. "Rest now," Ivy said, placing a warm blanket around Elena's shoulders. "Tomorrow, you can begin thinking about what comes next. Tonight, simply allow yourself to heal." Elena nodded, her eyes already growing heavy with exhaustion, despite the strange lightness she felt beneath the physical fatigue. As she drifted toward sleep in the quiet warmth of Ivy's cabin, she allowed herself, for the first time since her wedding night, to imagine a future that belonged entirely to herself, unburdened by broken promises or painful connections to people who had never truly deserved her loyalty in the first place. Elena remained at Ivy's cabin for 3 more days, allowing her body and mind time to fully recover from the ritual before making the journey back toward Ashwood territory. During those quiet days, she found herself reflecting deeply on everything that had happened since her wedding night, processing not just the betrayal itself, but the slower, more insidious pain of watching her pack gradually excuse it. On her final morning at the cabin, Ivy sat with her over a simple breakfast, studying her with the careful attention she had shown throughout Elena's entire stay. "You seem different than when you first arrived," Ivy observed, "steadier somehow, despite everything you have endured." "I feel different," Elena admitted, "lighter, in a way I did not expect. I think I spent so long carrying that bond, even when it caused me pain, that I did not fully realize how much weight it added to everything else I was struggling with." Ivy nodded knowingly. "That is common among those who choose this path. The bond, even broken through betrayal, still occupies space within your instincts, demanding attention and energy simply by existing. Without it, you may find you have far more clarity than you expected regarding what you truly want moving forward." Elena considered this as she finished her breakfast, turning over the question of what exactly she did want now that the bond no longer tied her to Damon, or, by extension, to Ashwood territory itself. She thought about the pack members who had begun treating her with distance and suspicion, about the whispered conversations reframing her pain as inconvenience, about Bree's growing closeness with Damon. "I do not think I can return to Ashwood as though nothing has changed," Elena said slowly, giving voice to a decision that had been forming steadily over the past several days. "Even without the bond, I would still be living within a pack that watched my husband betray me, and chose, ultimately, to prioritize his comfort over my dignity. I do not believe I can build any kind of future within that environment." "Where will you go instead?" Ivy asked, though her tone suggested she was not entirely surprised by Elena's reasoning. "I am not certain yet," Elena admitted. "But I know I need to find somewhere that does not carry the weight of everything that happened to me there. Somewhere I can rebuild, without constantly being reminded of what I lost." Ivy was quiet for a moment before offering a suggestion. "There are several unclaimed territories scattered beyond the major pack boundaries, areas where smaller groups of wolves have settled without formal alpha leadership, often struggling to organize themselves effectively. Some of these groups would benefit greatly from someone with your strength and clarity of purpose, Elena. You could build something entirely new, rather than trying to fit yourself back into a life that no longer serves you." Elena felt something stir within her at those words, a flicker of possibility she had not fully considered until this moment. She had spent her entire life training, and preparing to become Luna of Ashwood, absorbing lessons about leadership and pack management from her mother and from years of observation. Perhaps that training did not need to remain tied specifically to the pack she had married into. Perhaps it could serve her equally well in building something entirely her own. "Tell me more about these territories," she said, leaning forward with growing interest. Ivy spent the remainder of that morning describing several regions she knew of, areas populated by wolves who had left their original packs for various reasons, some through exile, some through choice, struggling to establish stable communities without the traditional structure most packs relied upon. One area in particular caught Elena's attention, a stretch of forest territory roughly 2 days' journey to the east, where Ivy mentioned a growing group of wolves had recently lost their previous leader and remained without clear direction. "They call themselves the Hollow Ridge Wolves," Ivy explained. "From what I understand, their former leader was weak and indecisive, allowing internal conflicts to fester without resolution. Many have considered leaving entirely, but a strong number remain hopeful that proper leadership could still transform their situation into something stable and thriving." Elena absorbed this information carefully, feeling a growing sense of purpose beginning to take shape within her. She thought about everything she had learned throughout her life, about leadership, about fairness, about the kind of pack culture she wanted to build if given the opportunity. She thought about Grace's steady wisdom, about Marcus's quiet loyalty, about the kind of Luna she had always hoped to become before everything with Damon fell apart. "I want to go there," she decided. "I want to see if I can help build something better for those wolves, and perhaps, in doing so, build something better for myself as well." Ivy smiled, the expression carrying both warmth and pride. "I believe that is a wise choice, Elena. You have the strength and the wisdom needed to lead effectively, and this pack could benefit greatly from someone willing to invest genuine care into their stability." Before Elena departed the following morning, Ivy provided her with detailed directions toward Hollow Ridge territory, along with several practical supplies to help sustain her during the journey. As Elena prepared to leave, she turned back toward the older woman, who had guided her through one of the most difficult decisions of her life. "Thank you," Elena said sincerely, "for everything. I do not know if I could have found my way through this without your guidance." Ivy placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "You found your own way through this, Elena. I simply provided the tools. The strength and resolve belonged entirely to you. Remember that, as you build whatever comes next in your life." Elena nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle meaningfully within her chest, and began the journey eastward toward Hollow Ridge territory, leaving behind the cabin that had witnessed one of the most transformative moments of her entire life. As she walked through the unfamiliar forest, she felt a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement building within her, an awareness that she was walking towards something entirely unknown, without the safety net of a pack or bond to guide her forward. But for the first time since her wedding night, that uncertainty did not feel like a burden. Instead, it felt like possibility, like the beginning of a story she would write entirely for herself, unburdened by the expectations and betrayals of the life she had left behind. She thought briefly of Marcus, wondering how he would react when he learned she did not intend to return to Ashwood, and made a mental note to send word to him once she reached her destination, ensuring he understood she had made this choice with clarity rather than desperation. As the sun rose higher overhead, casting warm light through the canopy of trees stretching endlessly before her, Elena continued walking steadily eastward, her steps carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had survived something incredibly difficult, and emerged, finally, ready to build a life defined entirely by her own strength and vision, rather than by the choices and betrayals of others. Elena reached the edge of Hollow Ridge territory 2 days later, exhausted from the journey, but carrying a steady sense of purpose that had only grown stronger with each mile she traveled. The forest here felt different from Ashwood, wilder in some ways, less structured, as though the absence of firm leadership had allowed nature itself to grow slightly unchecked around the scattered dwellings she began to notice as she moved deeper into the territory. She encountered her first Hollow Ridge wolf near a small stream, a young man crouched beside the water filling a wooden container. He startled upon noticing her approach, immediately rising into a defensive stance, clearly unaccustomed to unfamiliar faces wandering through territory that technically belonged to no formal pack. "Who are you?" he asked warily, his eyes studying her with suspicion. "My name is Elena," she said calmly, keeping her posture non-threatening despite his defensive stance. "I have traveled here hoping to speak with whoever currently leads your community, or with anyone able to help me understand your situation." The young man's expression shifted slightly, curiosity beginning to replace some of his initial wariness. "We do not really have a leader anymore," he admitted. "Not since the fighting drove most of the elders away. I am Ethan. I can take you to where the others have gathered, if you are willing to explain your purpose there." Elena agreed, and Ethan led her deeper into the territory, toward a cluster of simple structures built along the edge of a wide clearing. As they approached, Elena noticed the community bore signs of neglect, buildings in need of repair, paths overgrown with vegetation that should have been maintained, a general sense of disorder that suggested exactly the kind of leadership vacuum Ivy had described. A small crowd gathered as Ethan led Elena into the clearing, wolves of various ages studying her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. An older woman stepped forward from the group, her expression guarded, but not unkind. "I am Charlotte," she said. "I have been trying to help coordinate things since our previous leader left, though I confess, I have little experience with proper pack governance. What brings you to Hollow Ridge?" Elena took a steadying breath, aware that this moment would likely determine whether her journey here proved worthwhile, or whether she would need to continue searching elsewhere for a place to rebuild her life. "I was Luna of Ashwood Pack until recently," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Circumstances led me to leave that position, and through a mutual connection, I learned that Hollow Ridge might benefit from someone with experience in leadership and pack organization. I have come to offer my help, if you are willing to consider it." Murmurs rippled through the gathered crowd, and Elena watched carefully as expressions shifted between interest, skepticism, and cautious hope. Charlotte studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Why would a Luna from an established pack choose to leave everything behind for a struggling community like ours?" Elena considered how much detail to share, ultimately deciding that honesty would serve her better than vague explanations that might breed further suspicion. "My husband betrayed our marriage on the very night we were bound, choosing my own sister over our commitment to each other. Rather than remaining within a pack that increasingly excused his behavior for the sake of convenience, I chose to sever our bond entirely and build a new path for myself. I believe that path could involve helping a community like yours find stability, if you are willing to give me that opportunity." The clearing fell silent as her words settled over the gathered crowd. Elena watched their reactions carefully, noting the way several expressions softened with something like sympathy, while others remained cautiously reserved, clearly wanting more proof before fully trusting a stranger with such significant responsibility. "We have been struggling for months," Ethan spoke up from where he stood near the edge of the crowd, "fighting over resources, arguments about territory boundaries, no one willing to make difficult decisions for fear of upsetting others. If you have genuine experience leading a pack, we could certainly use guidance." Charlotte nodded slowly, though her expression remained thoughtful rather than immediately convinced. "Leadership requires more than good intentions, Elena. It requires proving yourself capable of handling difficult situations, of earning trust through action rather than simply through words. If you wish to help us, I suggest you begin by demonstrating that capability, rather than simply claiming a title you no longer officially hold." Elena appreciated the directness of Charlotte's response, recognizing the wisdom in not immediately handing authority to someone whose credentials could not be easily verified. "I welcome that approach," she said. "Give me a task, a problem your community has struggled to resolve, and allow me to demonstrate my capability through action rather than simply through words." Charlotte considered this for a moment before nodding. "There is an ongoing dispute between two families regarding water rights near the eastern stream, one that has caused significant tension within our community for weeks. If you can help resolve that dispute fairly, in a way that both families can accept, it would go a long way toward earning trust here." Elena nodded, understanding the challenge being presented to her. "I will need to speak with both families separately first, to understand their specific concerns, before attempting to find a resolution that serves the community as a whole." Over the following days, Elena immersed herself fully in understanding the water dispute, meeting individually with both families, listening carefully to their concerns, and gradually piecing together a resolution that addressed the core needs of both sides while establishing a fair system for water access that could prevent similar disputes in the future. She drew upon everything she had learned watching her mother lead with fairness, everything Grace had taught her about balancing different perspectives within a council setting, applying those lessons carefully to this unfamiliar community. When she finally presented her proposed resolution before the full community, explaining her reasoning clearly and addressing concerns from both families directly, she watched as skeptical expressions gradually shifted toward something closer to respect. Both families ultimately agreed to her proposed solution, and over the following weeks, the community began noticing a marked decrease in tensions surrounding the water access issue. Word of her successful resolution spread quickly through the small community, and gradually, other wolves began approaching Elena with their own concerns and disputes, seeking her guidance on matters ranging from territory boundaries to resource allocation to conflicts between neighboring families. Elena approached each situation with the same careful attention she had shown during the water dispute, listening thoroughly before offering solutions, always prioritizing fairness over convenience. Charlotte, observing this pattern developing over several weeks, eventually approached Elena with a proposition that surprised her, though perhaps it should not have given everything that had unfolded since her arrival. "The community has been discussing your role here," Charlotte said one evening as they sat together near the communal fire. "Many believe you should formally take on leadership of Hollow Ridge, rather than simply serving as an informal advisor." Elena felt a flicker of surprise at the suggestion, though beneath that surprise, she recognized a growing sense of rightness about the possibility. "I appreciate that trust," she said carefully. "But becoming alpha of an entire community carries significant responsibility. I want to be certain the community genuinely wants this, rather than simply accepting it, because no better alternative currently exists. I have watched you these past weeks," Charlotte said honestly. "You listen more carefully than any leader I have previously known. You prioritize fairness, even when it would be easier to simply please whoever is currently standing in front of you. Whatever happened with your previous pack, Elena, I believe Hollow Ridge would be fortunate to have someone with your character leading us forward." Elena considered this carefully, thinking about everything that had brought her to this point, from the devastating betrayal on her wedding night, to the painful ritual that had severed her connection to the life she once envisioned, to this unexpected opportunity now unfolding before her. She thought about the kind of leader she had always hoped to become, long before Damon or Bree had ever entered her life, and recognized that this opportunity offered her the chance to finally build that vision entirely on her own terms. "If the community genuinely wishes it," she said finally, "then I accept. I will do everything within my power to lead Hollow Ridge with fairness, strength, and genuine care for every member of this community." Charlotte smiled warmly, extending her hand toward Elena in a gesture of respect and partnership. "Then let us begin building something worthy of that commitment, together." As Elena shook Charlotte's hand, sealing this new chapter of her life, she felt a profound sense of rightness settling over her, a recognition that despite everything she had lost in Ashwood, she had found something equally meaningful here, a chance to lead not through inherited position or marriage, but through her own demonstrated strength, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to fairness. Whatever challenges awaited her, as the new leader of Hollow Ridge, she felt ready to face them, carrying forward every hard-won lesson from the painful journey that had brought her to this unexpected but deeply meaningful new beginning. 6 months passed, and Hollow Ridge transformed almost beyond recognition under Elena's steady leadership. The overgrown paths had been cleared and maintained, the damaged structures repaired through organized community effort, and disputes that once simmered unresolved for weeks now found fair and timely resolution through the council system Elena had established, modeled carefully after the balanced approach she had witnessed under Grace's leadership at Ashwood, though refined through her own hard-won understanding of what true fairness required. Elena stood one morning near the edge of the training grounds she had helped establish, watching a group of younger wolves practice coordinated defense formations under Ethan's careful instruction. He had proven himself remarkably capable over the past months, rising naturally into a leadership role among the younger generation, and Elena had recently begun grooming him for a formal position as her beta, recognizing in him the same quiet dedication she valued in leaders like Marcus. Thinking of Marcus brought a small, genuine smile to her face. He had sent word several times since her departure from Ashwood, careful updates delivered through trusted messengers, keeping her informed of pack developments without revealing information that might compromise his position there. Through his messages, she had learned that the pack's opinion regarding the entire situation had shifted considerably in the months following her departure. Apparently, once Elena was no longer present to serve as a convenient source of blame, the pack had begun reassessing the situation more honestly. Damon's leadership had grown noticeably weaker without Elena's steady presence beside him, his decisions increasingly questioned by pack members who had once excused his betrayal for the sake of stability. Bree, having stepped fully into the role Elena once held, found herself struggling under the weight of expectations and responsibilities she had not fully anticipated when she chose to pursue Damon, regardless of the cost to her sister. Marcus's most recent message had described growing dissatisfaction among several pack elders, whispers of instability that echoed uncomfortably close to the very patterns Elena had once tried to warn against during her time as Luna. It seemed that the pack's willingness to overlook betrayal for the sake of convenience had not actually resulted in the stability they hoped to preserve, but rather in a slower, more gradual erosion of trust and confidence in their alpha's judgment. Elena felt no satisfaction in hearing this news, no bitter vindication at watching her former pack struggle with consequences she had tried to warn them about. Instead, she felt only a quiet, distant sadness for the wolves who remained there, caught within a leadership structure that had chosen comfort over accountability, and a renewed gratitude for the path that had led her away from that environment entirely. Charlotte approached from across the training grounds, her expression carrying the kind of easy warmth that had become familiar over their months working together. "The council meeting is ready to begin whenever you are," she said. "We have several matters to discuss regarding the upcoming season's resource allocation." "I will be there shortly," Elena replied, casting one final glance toward the training grounds before turning to follow Charlotte toward the council hall they had recently completed constructing, a modest but sturdy building that served as the heart of Hollow Ridge's growing community organization. As they walked, Charlotte glanced sideways at Elena, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever regret leaving Ashwood?" she asked, a question she had never quite dared to voice so directly before this moment. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. "I regret the betrayal that led me to leave," she said honestly. "I regret losing what I once believed I had with Damon, and I regret the years I spent believing my sister was someone I could always trust completely. But leaving Ashwood itself? No, I do not regret that decision. It led me here, to something I built entirely through my own strength and effort, surrounded by people who value honesty and fairness, rather than convenient silence." Charlotte nodded, seeming satisfied with the genuine sincerity behind Elena's answer. "This community is fortunate you found your way here, Elena. Whatever difficulties led you to us, I believe Hollow Ridge is far better for your presence." They reached the council hall, where several community members already waited, gathering for the regular meeting that had become a cornerstone of Hollow Ridge's new governing structure. Elena took her place at the head of the table, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle comfortably over her shoulders, a weight she had learned to carry not through inherited position or forced circumstance, but through genuine dedication earned over months of consistent, fair leadership. As the meeting progressed, discussing practical matters of resource distribution and upcoming seasonal preparations, Elena found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation her life had undergone over the past several months. She thought about the devastated young woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal on what should have been the happiest night of her life, who had endured painful weeks of watching her own pack slowly excuse that betrayal, who had made the difficult, courageous choice to sever a bond that had brought her nothing but pain. That young woman had walked away from everything familiar, uncertain of what waited ahead, carrying only her resolve and the hard-won lessons of fairness and strength she had absorbed throughout her life. She had found, in the most unexpected of circumstances, an opportunity to build something entirely new, something that reflected her own values and vision, rather than the expectations others had placed upon her. The meeting eventually concluded, and as the council members dispersed to their various responsibilities, Elena remained seated for a moment longer, allowing herself a quiet moment of reflection before returning to the ongoing work of leading her community. She thought about Bree, wondering if her sister had found the happiness she had apparently wanted badly enough to sacrifice their relationship entirely. She thought about Damon, wondering if he had finally come to understand the full weight of what his choices had cost him, beyond simply losing Elena as his wife. But mostly, she thought about herself, about the strength she had discovered within herself throughout this entire difficult journey, about the community she had helped build from struggle into stability, about the future stretching ahead of her, finally unburdened by broken promises or painful bonds tying her to people who had never truly valued her as she deserved. That evening, as the sun set over Hollow Ridge territory, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and gold, Elena walked through the community she now called home, greeting familiar faces, checking on ongoing projects, offering guidance where needed. Children played near the central fire, their laughter carrying easily through the evening air, a sound that had become increasingly common as the community's stability grew stronger with each passing month. She paused near the edge of the clearing, watching the sunset paint the sky above the territory she now led, and allowed herself a genuine, peaceful smile. She had walked away from a life built on betrayal and convenient silence, had endured tremendous pain to reclaim her own instincts and her own future, and had found, ultimately, something far more meaningful than what she had lost. She had found herself, fully and completely, no longer defined by anyone else's choices or expectations, but by her own strength, her own values, and her own unwavering commitment to leading with honesty and fairness. Whatever challenges the future held for Hollow Ridge, and for herself, Elena felt ready to face them, carrying forward the hard-earned wisdom of everything she had survived, and grateful, despite everything, for the unexpected path that had led her to this new beginning. As night fully settled over the territory, stars beginning to appear across the darkening sky, Elena made her way back toward her own quarters, feeling a deep sense of peace she had not thought possible in the immediate aftermath of her wedding night devastation. She had broken a bond built on betrayal, walked away from a pack unwilling to fully protect her, and built, through her own determination and strength, a life and a community that finally, truly belonged to her alone.